Again, welcome to POWTS Chat, December 10th, 2024. Um, so what do we have for our agenda this month? We're going to talk about Soil of the Month. So one of the series that we're going to start doing is Katie's going to talk more in detail, but it's going to be a mini series. We're going to try to highlight a soil series, soil order, and a soil series each of the upcoming months here, just to sort of give you a little bit of flavor, some soils training. Then we're going to talk about training opportunities that are coming up and what the department is doing for training. And then we're going to go through some FAQs, or frequently asked questions, that we've seen over the last month or so. So with this section, I will turn it over to Katie, and then we'll pick back up here in a little bit.
Thank you, Matt. All right, so hopefully everyone can see my screen here. So as Matt said, we're going to be introducing a little bit of a mini series here to POWTS Chat, specifically talking about the soil orders that are found in Wisconsin, doing basically 1 month, one soil order, and then a soil series to highlight as a part of that. So the agenda here for this section of POWTS Chat is introduction to the soils mini series, and then we'll go more into the meat of it. For this month, we're going to include a history of soil science in Wisconsin, just to give you guys a base understanding of that, and then a more in-depth discussion of alpha soils. So that'll be the soil order this month, and then an example series as we end the presentation. So introduction to soils mini series. So why are we doing this, and for how long are we going to be doing it for? One thing, we talk about it all the time, soils are foundational for POWTS. If you don't have a good understanding of POWTS, of soils, it's very difficult to have a proper understanding of POWTS in the state of Wisconsin, because we're based on soils. In addition, credit for POWTS Chat is given for the CST license, so we have to talk about soils. We at the state try not to be rules for thee, not for me. And as we crack down on CST credits given for non-CST training activities, we felt that we needed to do more to talk about soils, because you do get credit for your CST credential, one continuing education hour for POWTS Chat every month. So how is it going to work? It'll be 5 to 6 mini series within POWTS Chat. Today's is going to be the longest of it by far, as we introduce it and introduce the history of soil science in Wisconsin. And the content is going to be primarily based upon soil taxonomy, which is a guidebook produced by NRCS. It's a system for classification for making of soil surveys. And then in addition, the most recent version of Soils of Wisconsin, so produced by Hardeman and Bachheim in 2017. So those will be the two references where most of the information for these presentations will come from. So if you're interested, the NRCS guide is easily found online for free, but Soils of Wisconsin is a book that's still copyrighted, so it's not a free, you have to pay for it on your own, but that's where a lot of the information will be coming from. So why soil orders? Why would we organize this in this way? Well, we must start somewhere. Of the 12 orders that occur in the world, according to the United States classification system of soils, 7 of them occur in Wisconsin, and so we'll cover those ones. We won't cover the others. And this number of 7 is manageable. It's a manageable number for our mini series. If we were to do, say, the sub orders or groups or something like that, it would just be too many. If we were to do, land use classifications, it would be too many. So that's kind of where I settled on it, on soil orders. And by understanding the order, you can kind of begin to unwind the history of that soil. So soil orders form in a certain way. And as we do soil testing or interpretive determinations, it's important to understand the history of the soil, how it formed, and how that will affect how the soil treats and disperses wastewater. So moving then into section number 2 here, the history of soil science in Wisconsin. I thought it important to highlight this because Wisconsin has a lengthy history of soil science, and you guys are all a part of that now. You're practitioners of soil science out on the land. So timeline, The first soil map of Wisconsin was produced in 1882. It was produced by T.C. Chamberlain. And actually, to our credit as a state, it was the first soil map produced in the United States. We have a long history here and very detailed. So I found this quote and I thought it interesting to share with you folks because it is kind of appropriate, I guess, for what we do. So the quote is from T.C. Chamberlain, and he said, "There are few natural formations more difficult to map than soils. There is an almost infinite gradation of varieties which there are no hard and fast line, and it is nearly or quite impossible to represent these gradation on a map." So as we talk about soil orders and we talk about mapping, of soils in Wisconsin, it's just important to keep in mind that the maps are not always accurate because they're very difficult to represent. The person that stood there and did the soil map, they probably weren't in the exact place that you are doing your soil test. So it's important to understand how soils are described so that you can understand whether or not what you're standing on matches the map unit and things like that. Okay, so the first soil science book was also for Wisconsin. So it was the first soil book published in the United States in 1895. So it was written by F.H. King. It was titled "The Soil, Its Nature, Relations, and Fundamental Principles of Management." So if you have spent time in Madison or you attended UW-Madison, you probably recognize these names. King is for whom the soil science building is named after, and Chamberlain is for whom the physics building was named after. So kind of interesting there that so much of Madison is based upon soils. The first county soil survey was Racine County, done in 1907. So I have a picture of it there, fieldwork in 1906. But from then on, the USDA, NRCS, there was a huge mapping effort across the entire United States. We will, for these presentations, use the most current version of Soils of Wisconsin, but it's important to keep in mind that there have been many versions of the Soils of Wisconsin published throughout the years. The first version in 1927 by Whitson, titled Soils of Wisconsin, and within it were descriptions of 25 series. We see a lot more series now, so you can see how much soil science has developed over the years. And there have been 4 versions of the Soils of Wisconsin book over time. So as you look at resources or develop your knowledge of the soils of Wisconsin, I would highly recommend these books to look at and see how things have progressed over the years. So this would be the 3rd version, I guess, which is Holes, Francis D. Holes, Soils of Wisconsin. It further developed the study of soils in Wisconsin. Hole was a very important soil scientist in the state, and we'll hear more about him later in the presentation. And an interesting thing about Hole's version of Soils of Wisconsin was that there was a popularized version of it published as the Soils Guide for Wisconsin Landlookers. And it's a more user-friendly version of it, I guess. And within that version, there's actually the first reference I saw to soil limitations for septic systems. So within that Soil Guide for Wisconsin Landlookers, there's a diagram and a note that says that in at least 60% of the area of the state, small-scale septic systems commonly fail to work properly because the land is too steep, the soils are too wet, impervious, or shallow to bedrock, with resulting contamination of surface and groundwaters. Well, we know now that 60% of the land is not suitable. And these books were published prior to the Wisconsin Mound, prior to at-grades, and prior to a lot of the work that the Small Scale Waste Management Project did, and prior to our modern code. So bringing it towards much more today, it feels like it was yesterday, but 2006 is the year that the final county in Wisconsin was mapped, and that was Iron County. So in 2006, that closed out the major mapping, the major timeline of on-the-ground soils work in terms of mapping for the state of Wisconsin from NRCS. So now all of the soil surveys are available. They're all available online, easy to reference, easy to use. But in order to use these soil surveys properly, you need to have an understanding of what some of it means. And that's kind of why we are going into this level of detail as to what the soil orders are and things like that. Okay, so then moving into our soil order of the month. So for the month of December, we chose alpha soils. Um, and why? Why start out the soil series with alpha soils? Well, for one reason, in the state of Wisconsin, alpha soils are the most abundant soil order. In terms of land percentage, almost 50%, 47% of the land in Wisconsin is an alpha soil. If you look at it at a global scale, it's like 10%. So they're much more common in the state of Wisconsin. It's partially due to our temperature and our historic land cover. So on a global scale, they occur in temperate, humid, and subhumid regions, typically, which Wisconsin falls very clearly into. So here's a distribution map of them in the state of Wisconsin. So the color red there is designated where the alpha soils are found. So you can see they're widely distributed, and having an understanding in this order will affect almost every soil tester in the state. I mean, there's a few counties where they're not very prominent, but in most parts of the state, they are. So if we dive deeper into the distribution of these, we can look at the suborders. So within the alpha soil group, there are a number of suborders, of which 2 are found in the state of Wisconsin. So those are the Aquolfs and the Eudolfs. So if we talk a little bit more about what each of those terms mean, the Eudolf, the U stands for Udic, meaning that it has a well-distributed rainfall or enough rain in the summer that crops can grow without irrigation. Doesn't mean that they don't irrigate, but crops could probably grow without irrigation, and there is good drainage on the site. The second suborder then is the Aquolfs, so those are poorly drained soils. And when we think of, sometimes in our context, when we think of poorly drained, we're not going as far as what an aquolf would be. They're very, very poorly drained. So if you look at the map, there you can see in the green color, that's where they are. So if we're looking at that Clark, Marathon County kind of area, they're distributed throughout the state, but there is a heavy proportion of them in those areas. So when we say poorly drained, we mean, the soil scientists mean poorly drained. So there's a picture here up on the screen of that was open in an area that's mapped as the Marshfield series, which would be an epi-aquolf. So meaning that it has epi-saturation, the soil is saturated to the surface for a huge portion of the year over an unsaturated horizon. So if you were to dig this hole, there would be an unsaturated horizon if you could get to it. So that photo, I don't know exactly where it is, but I'm thinking it's probably from Clark County would be my guess. And then I have a picture up here of a Eudolf. So we would define that as having favorable seasonal distribution of precipitation and good drainage, but being that the soil science terms are not exactly what we use in common language for septic systems, we would not consider this to be a good drainage regime, right? So not all Eudolfs are suitable for septic systems. So we don't just see that and say, oh, it's good. So this one, the picture that's up here specifically is of an aquic, so meaning that it has seasonal saturation near the surface. Glossu Eudolf. So also from Clark County, I'm pretty sure. So if we hone in even more, we can go to the great groups. And there are a number of great groups that are found in the state of Wisconsin, but the 2 most common ones are the Glossodolphs and the Haplodolphs. So what is the definition of those? Glossodolphs have albic materials in their argillic horizon, and they don't have a fragipan, and Haplodolphs just don't fit into any of the other categories. So if we were to go through the soil taxonomy guide and knock out everything else, you'd be left with the Haplodolphs, which are common in the state of Wisconsin. So if we just look at where they lie in distribution across the state, the Glossodolphs typically occur in the frigid northern zone of Wisconsin. Half-dwellers are typically in the southern mesic zone. So you can kind of know where you're at in terms of that. So historic vegetation, when we talk about an alpha sol, what would the historic vegetation have been on the site prior to modern land use? And when we write up interpretive determination reports, this is a portion that sometimes is overlooked because it's difficult to know, what was the historic vegetation there. But it's important because the historic vegetation has a very strong impact on how the soil's formed and what soil order they fall under. So alpha soils are typically formed under a broadleaf forest. So if we look at this early vegetation map of Wisconsin, we could see that it kind of correlates with the distribution. We see oak savannas covering a large portion of the southern part of the state, and northern mesic forest covering a large portion of the northern part of the state. So broadleaf forests, sometimes a mix of hardwood, softwood, sometimes evergreens and things like that. But as we talk about spotosols, we'll talk more about in later months, more about the historic vegetation and what impact that has. But what's important to remember about alpha soils is that they typically form under broadleaf forests. So what are the soil forming processes that are attributed to the formation of alpha soils? There are two primary ones. The first being the downward movement of clay in the soil profile. So we have a picture here of a very well-developed, a good demonstration profile for an alpha sol. So as water percolates through the soil, the clays are brought down through the profile and they form an argillic horizon. So the argillic horizon is a diagnostic horizon for an alpha sol. It must be present for it to be considered an alpha sol. So when we're out in the field, we should be able to identify and see this. So like I said, as water perks through, the clays are moved down through the soil profile and deposited. So okay, so there we go, moves down through. So the picture on the left there is a close-up of that, where you can see the deposition of clays and things like that. And this process influences soil texture, drainage, and fertility. Simple as, it oftentimes makes soils more compact and less permeable in the B horizon. It's designated by a small t, and we'll show that in a few slides here. So the second soil forming process that is important to the definition of an alpha sol is the biological enrichment of base cations. So we're not going to talk a lot about cation exchange capacity. That's beyond what you can do in the field. No one's doing that lab diagnosis in the field, but it's important to understand that this enrichment causes some of the characteristics that are important to alpha sols. So to meet the technical definition of an alpha sol, the base saturation of cations must be greater to or equal 35%. So that's a lab characteristic. We're not doing that in the field, but an understanding of why it forms helps us, understand what that means. So in an alpha sol, because it is typically a broadleaf forest, the deciduous trees and grasses and forbs and things like that absorb those base cations, so things like calcium, magnesium, potassium, from the subsoil through their roots. They bring them up to the surface, where they're then deposited through like leaf litter or decaying roots or something, things like that. From that point, they are decomposed and the cations are released back to near the soil surface, so in the A horizon. So this process, this exchange and recycling of cations, creates this biologically enriched zone near the A horizon. So we have that greater than 35% base saturation. So why does this form here? Why does an alpha sol form it? Why in an alpha sol? Well, alpha sols have a moderate amount of leaching due to the precipitation. We're not in a high weathering regime, not super wet, not super dry. And the acidic leaf litter can offset some of that. So we're not leaching it so fast that it moves through the profile, but we're also not depositing it. So when we talk more about mollisols, we'll talk a little bit more in detail about that. Okay, so just a brief overview of the characteristics then of an alpha sol. So the diagnostic horizon for an alpha sol is the argillic horizon. So that is that accumulation of clays. Additionally, they must have greater than 35% base saturation, which is not something you will be able to determine in the field, but it is something you will be able to see when looking at soil series reports. The soil forming processes are agglomeration and biological enrichment of base cations, which we talked about. And the representative horizon sequence is A, E, BT, and C. And that not every soil series follows that sequence, but that is the representative horizon sequence. The historic vegetation is broadleaf forest, and the current vegetation is often they're cropped or they're used for productive forestry as they are productive soils. They have that high base saturation, meaning that they are productive. But in terms of the grand scale of soils, alpha soils are actually they're defined by their moderation, I guess. They form in moderate temperatures, they have moderate fertility, moderate amounts of organic matter. For the state of Wisconsin, it's high, but for other places, it's not. And they have they're formed because we have moderate amounts of leaching. So that's why it forms in Wisconsin, I guess. So now we are going to talk about an example series, which some of you probably could already guess if you know a lot about the state of Wisconsin and our soils and which ones we're proud of. But I'm going to pull up a video here on the next one. And if you can't guess what the example series that we're going to talk about today is after that, well, we'll talk about it anyway, but so help you if you can't figure it out. So I'm going to fast forward in, and I guess I chose to use a video that someone else put on YouTube because I thought that you guys maybe wouldn't want to hear my singing voice. It's worse than my speaking voice. So here we go. And to go, a soil to know, Wisconsin's crops and livestock grow, and forests to on and to go, and forests to on and to go. Great Lakes region, fertile land, glaciers spread both clay and sand, winds their silts, their forests grew, giving soils their brownish hue. Great Lakes region, fertile land, you strengthen us in heart and hand. Each slope, each flower, each wild and all proclaims a unity in all. Okay, so Anago-silt loam. If you hadn't guessed it, that's what it is. That's what we're going to talk about today. Anago-silt loam is the Wisconsin state soil and has been since I think 1986 was the year that, maybe earlier, I don't recall, was the year that Wisconsin got its state soil. So we are probably the only state that has a state soil song, which you just heard. And this is all due to some of the lobbying work of Hull, who we talked about earlier, who wrote one of the earlier versions of Soils of Wisconsin. So the Anago-silt loam. The Anago-silt loam is an alpha sol. I'm going to have a picture here up of it of a typical, maybe not typical, but a way that you would often see the landscape of an Anago-silt loam. So this is a potato field near Anago. And historically, this would have likely been a northern hardwood forest, but today it is a potato field because the soils are good for that kind of production. So why did Hull choose the Anago-silt loam to be our state soil? Well, for one reason, it's primarily found in the state of Wisconsin. So you can see here the distribution map of all the extent of the soil map units for the Anago-silt loam. And it's primarily in Wisconsin. There's some in Minnesota, but that's it. So it's Wisconsin's state soil. It's pretty productive, especially when it comes to a northern soil. And it's widely distributed across the northern part of the state. So when we look here at this wall of text, how do we look at the typical PDON, the typical soil profile description, and see if it meets what what the definition of an alpha sol is. So we look at the taxonomic class. At the very end of it, it's defined as a Glassodolph. So it's a northern alpha sol in the state. It's a northern alpha sol when it comes to the state of Wisconsin. So we can take a look at that taxonomic class there and see that it is an alpha sol. If we also look down at the typical, horizonation of the Anago silt loam, we can see that it has an AP horizon. It's almost always under agriculture, so it has an AP horizon. There's an E horizon, there's a BE horizon, meaning that there's a glossic horizon there, and then a BT horizon, so that accumulation of clays in the B horizon. That is that argillic horizon that is diagnostic to the alpha sol. It has clay films on it. And then moving down further, we have the sea horizons, and there's a number of interesting things about the Anago silt loam that are not specific to alpha sols, but it is an interesting soil. So we can see here from the soil, the typical pedon description from NRCS, these are the diagnostic horizons and features, and I've made in bold that it has an argillic horizon. That's where it is. And that is the defining characteristic of it. In addition, if we look at the lab data for Anago silt loam, we can see the base saturation, and it does meet that criteria of above 35%. Again, you won't see that in the field, but if you look at the lab data for the lab results that NRCS did to describe those soil series, then you'll be able to see it. So in terms of what this means, what does an alpha sol mean for a septic system, for a POWTS in the state of Wisconsin? Alpha sols are an incredibly diverse group of soils. So there's no one definition of, oh, if you have this, it means this. But having an understanding of how to classify the soils and know that the series description that you're looking at is accurate to the soil that you're standing on is important to being a high functioning soil tester. So that's all I have. Like I said, this is going to be the longest one by far. Next month, we'll go into another soil order, but it'll be shorter because we won't have to have the history or the introduction. So that is all that I have, Matt. If anyone has any questions, uh, that's all. So.
Right. So we'll come back to the rest of POWTS chat here. And we're going to move on to some training, what we've been up to for training. I know I did see one comment in the POWTS chat about it. We do have a basic soils class that we're offering. We've been offering them in the spring and fall sessions, typically a day and a half of classroom and then an afternoon of going out in the field to take a look at some soils locally. We decided this year we're going to try to do a basic soils class virtually. So it's being given February 12th and 13th and 19th and 20th. The reason it's being spread over 4 days is that we know virtual it's sometimes a little bit harder to sit and stay engaged as opposed to a live in-person training. So we're just doing some 3-hour time slots on those days. So it's going to stretch over 4 days. And we're going to have possibly some breakout sessions. We haven't quite finalized everything and do some other things. We'll have some more instructions and some more information forthcoming as it gets developed. But we'll have some other things for you to do to sort of get some of that feel of a live in-person soils training. Unfortunately, the registration is full. We did have it posted out there. We did send out the broadcast email to license holders, and it filled up really fast. So part of the issues that we have here is we still don't want to have a large group. We don't want to have 300 people in a virtual soils class because it gets lost. Is that we're not able to engage the people. We're not able to make sure that we're answering questions adequately. If we do have breakout sessions, we're not going to be able to have anything that's worthwhile if the breakout sessions are 50 people apiece. So we did have to limit the registration, and unfortunately, the registration is full. I don't think we're going to have time or the resources to do another virtual training this winter. We'll probably have another one next winter. I don't know if we will do one over the summer just because people get busy and we don't want people to attend one or two sessions and then skip the other ones. It's not going to be worthwhile for them. And also, we're busy in the summer too doing our field work. We do intend to offer an in-person live event again this spring. We don't have a location or a date set up yet. We'll be doing that cooperatively with the UW Extension like we did last fall. I don't know where it's going to be yet, but be on the lookout for that. So if you're interested in another soils training class, we will be doing one this spring. Again, to be determined once we develop that. The other one that we did list for upcoming training is the POWTS design class. So we have two classes, conventional system design and mound pressure design. They're both being taught on January 30th. So we have a morning session and an afternoon session for those. Unfortunately, those are also full. Filled up very, very quickly once we posted that information or sent out the email. I know we've had a lot of input and we've asked for people have asked to do another training session or can we get in, sneak in. Again, we're going to have some breakout sessions and it's not going to be useful to discuss designs if we have, 20 people in a breakout session. So we have to limit the number of people that can attend. So we do have breakout sessions with POUT staff that we have adequate coverage and the groups aren't so cumbersome that we're not able to adequately address everybody. So, with that being said, we're looking at scheduling another session tentatively for March 6th. That has not been confirmed yet. We're still trying to work out details to make sure we have staff, but it looks like that may be the date. So watch for another listing. I don't know if we'll do another broadcast email announcement or if we'll just post it on our website, but we realize that we've had a lot of demand for this and we will be offering another session. We just don't know when yet but we're going to try to get one wedged in here with all the other training that we're doing and other outreach that we'll talk about here in a minute. We do have a county inspector training coming up. This is just for county inspectors. So if you're not a county inspector, you won't be able to sign up for this one. But just for the county inspectors, so we have offered the last few years training, 2-day training session, immersive, all about county inspection duties and issuing permits, things like that. That's why it's not useful for the general public or other credential holders because it pertains to things that the counties would do and what their county functions are. So we do have registration is still open for that. We do have slots. I know we've had quite a few people that have signed up already, and I know a lot of you are aware of that at the counties, and I know sometimes it takes a little bit of time to get approvals to make sure that you're able to attend. But if you're interested in that, check our website, or if you have questions about it and haven't been to one in the past, let us know and we can fill you in on what's going on for that. And that'll be held in Wausau. But again, it's only for persons employed at a local governmental unit. So for those that are in Milwaukee County, I know we do have a few people that tune in down there. They're able to attend also. Other events that'll be coming up this winter for us. DSPS staff again is going to be collaborating with other organizations to provide other educational opportunities this winter. So we have the Wisconsin County Code Administrators. We did one this fall with them. We'll probably be doing one for their spring organization. We also have they have regional groups that have meetings, and we'll be providing educational opportunities with those folks. WALRA, Wisconsin On-Site Waste Recycling Association, and the Wisconsin Liquid Waste Carriers Association, they have a joint conference every year. So if you have not been to that, I believe it's at the Wilderness Resort. If I remember, it's the end of January, I think January 31st into February 2nd, down at the Dells. So if you haven't been a member of that group or unaware of it, it's a good educational opportunity, including a trade show, a lot of educational opportunities. So check out their website if you're interested in that. We will be there providing at least an update. I don't know what else we may or may not be doing. And then we will also have a booth at the trade show. So if you want to ask us questions or walk through how to renew a credential or something like that, we'll have staff available to help out there too. We also have other county regional updates. I know a lot of counties will put on their own training opportunities. So an individual county may have, a plumber update kind of thing. We also have others that will have sort of like a regional one. There's a training event up in the Tri Lakes or up in the Three Lakes area for the Tri County area, Vilas, Oneida, and I forget who the other one is, Forest, I think it is. So they have sort of a regional one up there. There's another one in Sparta that has several counties that join in from that sort of western central part of the state. So there's some regional ones that we will be attending, also giving some updates or collaborating with them to provide educational opportunities. And then we also have the private companies. There's a couple like tank manufacturer, another product warehouse that does educational opportunities. They have their own that they provide, and also that we will be there providing updates. So you'll see DSPS staff out quite a bit besides the other events that we have sponsored ourselves. And then again, Pouch Chat, you guys are here, so you already know about it, but just remember, throughout the whole season that every second Tuesday of the month, we'll be here doing our Pouch Chat, except for usually one in the middle of summer. We get short staffed or we have events going on like Farm Technology Days, and we'll usually skip one in there just because we're pulled a little thin in the summertime. But the other important thing is remember that any of the past episodes can be viewed on the department's YouTube channel. So even if you miss Pouch Chat, you're not able to tune in because you have something going on, either something in your business or personal life, like a doctor's appointment or something, and you can't make it. All the Pouch Chats are recorded, and then they're also stored or uploaded onto the YouTube channel for the department, so you can access it through there. Also, some other departmental things if you're interested in some of the other activities for the department, but you can view old Pouch Chats. You won't get credit for the previously recorded Pouch Chats. You'll only get credit for those that you've attended live. But again, there's still great content there, or if you see it and there's something you want to reference again, you can go back to it. Or if somebody in your office, we've talked about, the new hire. If you don't know what to do with them, I guess you can, besides making them learn the Antigo Sit Loam Soil song, you can have them watch some Pouch Chat videos. And then all of our training, we use Book so we go to our DSPS POWTS page. You can see any kind of educational opportunities that we have coming up on there. So keep it bookmarked, check it often. We'll try to send out some notices, but again, we've these last trainings we did post early, and then we finally sent out the notice. And again, when we send it out to a couple thousand people, the events do fill up very quickly. Again, our training events do have limited availability because we want to make sure that we're able to access everybody during those training events and have communication with them and not get overwhelmed on that. But check out our book when, and that's at bookwen.com/WIPOWTS. And that would be and that's the link on our website. So if you want to look at any of the book when educational opportunities, and these would be just the ones that the department um, that holds. If we do something in cooperation with an outside group like liquid waste carriers or WAWRA or a county, or if we're doing our soils training um, with UW Extension or something like that, then the registration would be through them. So now the last section that we're going to get into is some frequently asked questions that we've seen over the last month or so. Bring up some of those. ESLA accounts. So the question we had is, can a certified soil tester submit an interpretive determination report directly in ESLA? So a lot of times we'd have an interpretive report done, and it would be um, submitted by the master plumber or something who has an account or traditionally submits plans. But yeah, a CST can create their own account and should submit the reports in ESA themselves. You're the one generating that work. You're the one signing off on it. You can create your own account in ESA and submit your own interpretive determination report. And it used to be that interpretives could be piggybacked on a plan. And interpretive reports for the last couple of years are now they're separate. They're a separate DIS number. They're a separate application, have a separate fee. They're submitted separately from the plan. So CST can create that profile and directly submit. Question about effluent 2. So this would be our table in 383. Talks about what our loading rates are for the different soil types and textures. So if a design utilizes a pretreatment device and produces effluent with less than 30 milligrams per liter of BOD and less than 30 milligrams per liter of TSS, can that design go to the county or the state? So the question was, where do we submit a design if we're using pretreatment? So the answer is so the design can be reviewed by the state or the county if the county has agent status for that. But if you are generating that 3030, I didn't add the footnote attachment, but that little superscript C there at the end of the BOD, less than 30 milligrams per liter, that says it requires pressure distribution. So if the county has agent status for pressure distribution, you could do that even in a conventional if you're doing that, but the county would have to have agent status to do that. If they're doing mounds and getting pretreatment, if the county has agent status for a mound, they would be able to do that. If they don't have agent status to do their pressure distribution or to do a mound or whatever you'd be discharging into for that type of system, then that review would then have to go back to the state. We've also had a question about systems of last resort. And the question was, what system qualifies for a system of last resort? So a mound in a box, a pretreatment, individual site design, holding tank. So some counties have said, you know, they have a preferred order of what kind of system you'd like to have installed on a site, and um, what is the system of last resort? Where do you draw that line? Well, that is sort of a term that's not really part of the code, is that the plumbing code does not identify a system of last resort. SPS 383.32 parent 2A1 notes that a county may restrict the use of a holding tank through a local prohibition or ordinance. So that's what the code says. Is the code says if the holding tank is the only option, the county can restrict it and say that if not for new construction, or they could say you can't use a holding tank as a system of choice, and that's where the term will come in that a holding tank is a system of last resort. But what is that threshold by saying that? i- if I can't get a conventional, can I use a holding tank? Most counties will say, no, you have to put a mound in. To what extent do you go? Then do you use a mound in a box, which is approved component manual? Or what if we require pretreatment or an individual site design to do something unique, or other multitudes of sizing per capita or something like that? The code doesn't identify that, and it just says that a county can restrict the use of a holding tank. So it doesn't say system of last resort or list a series or a sort of a scale that this system is preferred over another. Nowhere in the code does it say that. So it just says that the counties can restrict the use of a holding tank, and that's where that line is drawn. And that depends on up to the county to where they want to, so to speak, draw that line of when will they allow a holding tank. And that's why the counties have to be very careful in their ordinances on how they word things, because we've also had some issues of um, a holding tank being used for commingled waste with industrial wastewater, being used to get around high strength waste or something like that. Utilities. How do we handle utilities running under a proposed mound or an at-grade? So hopefully our yard doesn't look like this with all the flags everywhere. But most utilities will have an easement granting them access. Uh, each easement can be miles different from another one. So each easement is basically going to spell out what may or may not be done on a particular property. So if you do have a utility out there, I mean, if it's just like a personal utility that ran, whatever buried line from the house to the garage to provide power, um, that's a private, it's really not accounted for. But most of the major utilities, power lines, gas lines, things like that, they're going to have an easement, and that's going to spell out what they're allowed or not allowed to do. Most likely we're going to have to get approval from that utility company to cross over or put something on top of any of their utilities that are out there. We had a question about wetlands. Can a system be sited on a mapped wetland if it meets A+4 or with an interpretive determination report? So we may have some situations where something is mapped as a wetland. What can we do with that? Well, the plumbing code does not identify or address wetlands as a limitation. It doesn't say if you're a mapped wetland, you can't put a system there. But I guess common sense would sort of lay out the fact that if it's mapped a wetland, it's probably not a great site for a septic system. But there have been some errors or some issues where things are possibly mapped and they may be incorrect and they need to be removed from the inventory. However, it's not our purview to decide whether you can or can't put in that area. We look at what the soils are. If the soils have A+4 or they meet the conditions with an interpretive determination report, we will approve it. It will pass the plumbing code. But again, the plumbing code doesn't address other things. Just for instance, we may have a building setback or zoning issues that a county may have. There may be an issue here with a wetland. So we may say that it meets our code, but there may be other organizations or regulatory groups that have jurisdiction over that and rules that prevent that system from ever being developed or the system being placed. So even if we say, yeah, it meets A+4 somehow, or with an interpretive, um, the soils meet, and we say, yeah, the site meets, and we can approve a plan. But if the DNR says that's a MEP wetland and you can't develop it, um, that's who's going to have ultimate jurisdiction. So something to look at. It's not part of our review process necessarily, but other agencies do have restrictions that may affect siting of a POWTS, including wetlands. I had a question about apprentices. How many apprentices can one have? How do we deal with that apprenticeship program? This has been actually a very difficult question to answer. So the best that I came up with is in 2017, Act 148 set the number of apprentices to skilled persons or journeymans at a 1-to-1 ratio. So as long as you can have multiple number of apprentices, but you can't have more apprentices than the number of skilled persons. So if you're a master and you have a journeyman, you can have one apprentice because you can have that journeyman watching that apprentice for you. Um, so that's the number that I came up with. It used to be less than this or restricted to just one period, but they realized that they're having problems getting people into the trades. So this basically act reflected apprentices across the state to allow it a 1-to-1 ratio. So if you're a master and you have two journeymen, you can have two apprentices underneath you. Um, so that's the best I came up with. It was a real difficult trying to sort of um, tease this out of the codes from what I can see, but that's the best information that I have. I had a question about mound setbacks. This one seems to come up, and this is the same diagram we've been using here for almost 25 years or more. But where do we measure mound setbacks? So if we're measuring from a well, because the DNR sets the well code, they measure from the toe of a mound. They don't want to try to ascertain where the cell is inside the mound, and so they just go from the perimeter toe. So upslope, side slope, downslope, wells are measured from the perimeter. The other encumbrances that we have, such as for like a building or something like that, those are measured from the basal area. So that would be the cell itself and the downslope toe. So that's sort of highlighted in sort of the pinkish red there. That's where we measure. But the toes may also not encroach upon something. So you'll see like to the property line, that's that dotted line to the left there. You can be 0+, so you can be up to it with your toe, but you can't be on the property line. The same thing with the buildings. You can be sort of up to it, but you can't can't be on it. And so this is what the design is. So afterwards, if there's landscaping or something to blend in the mound with, other landscaping or other filling that may take place with the building, that's after the fact. This is what's required as part of the design. We've also had questions about pumping versus inspection. Can a POWTS maintainer sign off on a 3-year service interval instead of pumping? And yeah, it's sort of a loaded question, but county maintenance programs, or through the county maintenance program, they send out a notice every 3 years. So the anaerobic tanks must be serviced if more than 1/3 full of scum or sludge. They don't necessarily need to be pumped. So I know we've had some groups that are doing inspections now around the state, and it's caused some friction with the pumpers. But that 3-year service interval, it's an inspection to see if the tanks need to be pumped. The pumpers typically do pump the tanks out, but they don't have to be unless they're more than 1/3 full of scum and sludge. If they're not more than 1/3 full, they can be signed off on. And then they're good until the next service interval that comes around or the maintenance interval that comes around. Had a Wisconsin Fund question. This has actually been occurring for the last couple months. When are Wisconsin Fund applicants going to receive the grant monies for the 2023 submissions? So those systems installed in 2023 and applied for, the counties had to send the applications into us by the end of January of 2024 this year. Then we were processed, had to send a request for payment. The counties had to send that in, and then we finalize everything. And typically, checks usually went out in sort of early to mid September. But this year, I don't know exactly what happened, but things were held up a bit. But we were informed that the fiscal program said that checks were mailed to the counties as of yesterday. So I know we had one county that was asking us questions, but for the other counties or other people that have applied or are working with somebody, supposedly those checks were mailed out on yesterday, Monday. So just be aware that hopefully shall resolve everything that we've been backed up on. Maintenance reports. Question was, how soon after the maintenance event does that event need to be reported to the county? What's the time period? Can it be just like semi-annual reports, or what do they have to do? SPS 383.55 Parent 2 Parent B requires that any maintenance or servicing event be recorded with the county within 30 days of the event. So if that 3-year service interval goes out there and somebody says, "Yep, I pumped it," or if they said it does not need to be pumped, I'm signing off on it saying that we're good to go, or technically any other maintenance or servicing event that occurs. So if you're a plumber and you replace a pump out there, you should be reporting that to the county. If you do anything else on that property, a maintenance or servicing event is technically supposed to be reported to the county and tracked within 30 days of that event. Had a question about soil report certifications. Question is that we had a soil test that was actually signed off by the CST in 2019, and it was never submitted to the county, but now the plan was done and they wanted to use the 2019 soil test. The problem is that the CST's license had expired. Um, and I think it expired in 2022 or something like that. But anyway, the license has expired now. And the question is can they still use that soil test? And the answer is no. The CST doesn't hold a current valid credential anymore, and the soil test must be filed upon completion. So once that soil test was complete in 2019, SPS 385.40 Parent 1 requires them to submit the soil test upon completion. So if they signed it in 2019 and completed it, um, they're in violation of 385.40 Parent 1 by not submitting it currently or upon completion. And then even though if they said, well, I just completed it now, then the CST doesn't have a valid license. So No, the county should not be accepting that solar report, and we did not accept it as part of our plan review because it's an unlicensed CST now, and it was not submitted in a timely manner. Because otherwise, somebody could let their license expire and just keep backdating soil tests to when they had a license, and no, we won't accept that. Had a question about RV transfer tanks. The question that was actually from an engineer developing a campground. And what exactly is an RV transfer tank? It's a larger tank, typically like 150, 300 gallons, usually placed above ground underneath the RV to accept waste from that RV. These are more of like the permanent campsites where people build decks attached to their campers and they rent a spot for the whole season and typically leave it up there season after season. Um, but these are larger tanks placed to accept the RV waste and give them auxiliary storage. So because obviously those more permanent installations are not taking their RV and dragging it down the road to a dump station to be able to empty their internal tank. So they want something a little bit larger there. But those must be an approved product and be installed in a licensed campground in order to use them. So you can't just be using them anywhere. They have to be a licensed campground to do that. Also had a question about model sanitary ordinances. Does the department provide a model sanitary ordinance for counties to use? And the answer is no. The department has not created a model ordinance. Counties have been required to have ordinances for decades, and the last major change that we had was back in 2000. So the counties have had ordinances that have been sort of tweaked, over the decades, kind of thing. Um, we do ask the counties, they do share with each other for some ideas or things to put in or how to address certain things. We can give you some input on that if there's anything that you'd like, but we do not provide a model ordinance because it would be a lot of effort on our part to create something that most of the counties wouldn't use because they already have an ordinance out there. But anyway, that's the end of the POW chat, the FAQs, and the training session of it. I hope you liked our sort of mini series on um, soils of Wisconsin, and we'll be doing another one. I don't know which one we'll be doing next month, but we will be picking up another soil order and soil series and talking about that a little bit. So if you have any other questions in here, feel free to jump in. Otherwise, I'm going to stop my sharing and turn it back over to Katie to wrap things up.
All right. Thank you, Matt. So there were a few questions in the chat here, so I'm going to read them out loud and we'll try to answer them to the best of our ability. So one of the first questions then was, can a 4-year apprentice work on a POWTS alone? So in the chat, I cited the specific code sections regarding what plumbing apprentices can do and the definition of what they can do. So per 305-95 plumbing apprentices, a person who holds a registration as a plumbing apprentice may install or modify plumbing under the general supervision of a person who is a licensed master plumber. So it doesn't designate first year, fourth year, fifth year, whatever year apprentice. But the definition of general supervision means to assume the responsibility of an activity of others and its result without being present at the site where the activity is being conducted. So they're not alone. I mean, spiritually, they're with their master because they're overseeing that activity, but the master could be off-site. And the plumbing code, specifically 305, does not state what year this can be done at. Whether or not apprenticeship programs have different designations is something that I am not aware of, but that's what the code says. All right, next question. Wouldn't a master that has a journeyman be able to have 2 apprentices, 1 for each? Matt, do you know the answer to that one? Or would that be better directed towards the master and journeyman and apprentices, their apprentice program?
That was the big question I could not figure out an answer to. To me, it appears that it looks like a skilled individual. So you could possibly have 2 apprentices, one for the master and one for the journeyman. Um, but I could not ascertain that, so that's sort of why I left it silent. But good catch on rooting out my non-answer that I had there. That I have not been able to ascertain yet, other than what I saw is that it said one skilled, but it kept referring back to how many journeymen they needed. But you could have a master without any journeyman, and I assume that you'd have one apprentice. I think that you may be able to have one apprentice for one journeyman and for one master, but that would have to be addressed through the apprentice program, and that I don't know yet.
All right, thank you, Matt. So then there was a comment here about a mound setback, 15-foot, no disturbance from the downslope toe. So I'll step in and I'll say the diagram specifically covers those setbacks required by 383 that are in the code. The no disturbance from the downslope toe, which is found in the component manuals, is also applicable to systems, but it is specific to the component manuals. They have specific soil textures and things like that that falls under. Matt, do you have additional comments on that 15-foot no disturbance downslope toe?
Well, the only thing is that the 15-foot no disturbances for soils that have a limitation on them, but it's a good idea not to be in a downslope toe. Period. Um, you should not be working a system for a downslope toe. We should not have barriers. Those mound systems are designed to use that downslope infiltration or infiltrative area. We shouldn't have restrictions or set or limitations in that area.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, next question. So this was specifically regarding the slide about inspections. So are inspections required annually or on a 3-year interval? And I did not pull up the code section for that
Yeah.
specifically.
So their anaerobic tanks are required to be um, pumped out once or they're required to be serviced if more than 1/3 full of scum and sludge. They're also required on a 3-year interval to be looked at to see if they need to be if they're more than 1/3 full, and then they need to be pumped if they are. So that's what the requirement is. But there are some other requirements for things such as like a pretreatment unit or something that requires maintenance more than once every 12 months, or could be a filter or something on that. And if there is, then those have to be done. So there may be other components out there that require a more frequent maintenance event, but the anaerobic tanks are typically a 3-year maintenance event or an inspection to see if they need to be maintained. So typically that's a 3-year process.
Thank you. Okay, next question was regarding the announcement of awards for the Wisconsin Fund. And the comment is kind of general, but if I guess I'd like to expound upon that and ask Matt, are you the best contact for Wisconsin Fund awards, or is there someone better in the department that a county should contact if they have questions regarding the Wisconsin Fund?
Well, nobody's a great contact. We'll leave it at that. Since the days before we used to have a dedicated person that ran the Wisconsin Fund program, Jean Joyce, when she was around. But if you do have questions, you feel free to funnel them to me or your field staff person, and we will try to get that answer for you. Because we're not necessarily intimately involved with the process. But if you do have questions, feel free to reach out to any of us, and we'll do our best to figure out answers for you.
Okie doke. All right. I'm gonna keep the questions going. So, can you clarify putting a mound over a natural gas lateral, putting the mound over the line between the house and the main? We have some homeowners move the lateral and some have been installed right over the lateral. We are not certain what the right answer is. Would you like to give a non-answer about easements, Matt?
Yeah, the non-answer is there an easement or not? And that's what it really falls down to is does that gas company have an easement, or what is the conditions for that? Even without an easement, it's one of these things that the best practice would be to ask that company, what's going to happen if I decide to put stuff here? Because frankly, if there are lines and things buried in you and you do put a system over the top of it, even though from our end it may be legal, if they decide, hey, we need to maintain that line, they're going to be digging right through that system. And that's going to cause them problems down the road. So, the best practice would be to stay away from those areas. But I understand on some lots, it's just not feasible and they have to take their chances and do what they do. So that's the best non answer I could muster.
Thank you. Okay. There was more questions about servicing events. Then let me find it in the chat. So does a service have to be reported if the professional hasn't been paid yet? So I'm looking at the code section right now. So specifically regarding the reporting of servicing events, 383.55 is a specific code section that covers whether, when, and whether it needs to be reported. And
Yeah.
as I,
Yeah, I don't see anything in the code ever that relates to whether somebody has been paid or not. That's a civil issue. If you're not getting paid for your services, then you may have to take them to small claims court or receive some other recompensation or through another avenue. But that doesn't negate um, the rule of for where your license says is that if you do a servicing event that you need to report those events.
all right. And who has the authority to enforce the servicing event?
I'm not quite sure where that's trying to get to, but um, any kind of servicing events that are done, it's a part of the maintenance program from the county. So the county has an ordinance in there that requires usually some kind of servicing or part of that maintenance event and returning the card. There's also the state rule that requires that. So I'm not sure where they're getting at. Is that I know there is a little bit of disconnect between our program and the pumpers because they're licensed through the DNR. But if there is some kind of violation on that aspect, we would work with the DNR, and there are requirements that they have to um, basically make sure that they're complying with our rules. And if they're not, then they can get in trouble with the DNR, and we can go down that avenue if that's what's occurring.
Thank you. Okay. I think we're getting close to the end here. So a clarification regarding 383.32.1H, which states that an RV transfer tank may be used on properties
Yeah,
where they are permitted by county ordinance.
Yeah, I didn't mention that also, but yeah, there is an exception in there that if a county by ordinance allows RV transfer tanks that they can do that. That would not be for a home or something like that, but it would just be for an RV if the county ordinance says that they allow them. I know there are some areas where people buy a plot of land and they bring the RV in and they want a transfer container, and that they can do.
Okay. I think we are getting very close to the end. So the minimum, and speaking of things that are county specific, what is the minimum size for a porta potty, and are there regulations for it?
Yes, porta potties are actually regulated under SPS 391. That's the sanitation code, the same as composting, incinerating toilets, and privies. So that's under that same section of the code. So if you want to address that technically a county could require licensing and permitting of porta potties if they really wanted to get into that. Most counties do not, but that would be up to the county what they want to do. That's sort of outside the purview of the what we think of as the standard plumbing codes. But if the counties want to address that through Chapter 391, they can, and that is a minimum standard code. So if they want to go above and beyond and require a certain size or configuration and license every porta potty for every county fair or festivity that comes along, you're more than welcome to tackle that.
Okay. Is licensee sending out any notifications to for credentials needing renewals? I do not know the answer to that. So I don't know.
Well, I guess the answer was, has anybody seen one? And I don't think
I
so.
did
So,
not receive one, but things change
yeah.
rapidly in the credentialing world, and something like that would be a relatively quick software change for them to make. So I wouldn't rely on it, but I wouldn't say that it wouldn't be possible. Like it may happen, but I haven't seen it. So okie doke. I think that might be, oh, one more. Should holding tanks be in the 3-year maintenance to check tank for working alarms and leakage? So, existing POWTS, so POWTS prior to 2000 that didn't have that, they don't have a specific maintenance agreement. That applies to dispersal
Yeah.
components consisting in part of in situ.
Yeah. And that's for that 3-year maintenance check is for anaerobic tanks. So typically septic tanks. Now, holding tanks, most counties will do that as part of a 3 year to make sure that if they haven't seen anything pumped out. But again, holding tanks should probably be serviced a lot more than once every 3 years, if they're correctly designed or correctly or being used. So you will see those servicing events. And again, if they're being serviced, they should be reported in within that 30-day window so that counties know that it's taking place. But yeah, the counties also have some latitude in setting up their maintenance program. So if they want to make sure that at least if we're not getting other reports in at least once every 3 years, that we are getting some kind of check on them, the counties can set that up.
Thank you. All right, so I think that ends the questions that are in the chat.